Welcome to the Turd Nerds. We are the functional gastroenterology podcast discussing all things poop. Before we take the plunge into today's episode, let us tell you a bit about ourselves. I'm Dr. Rebecca Sand, a naturopathic physician and acupuncturist, and I specialize in all things gastroenterology, hormones, and fertility.
I'm Dr. Ami Kapadia, and I'm a medical doctor trained in family medicine and functional medicine with a special interest in gastrointestinal health, food and environmental allergies, and autoimmune disease.
And I'm Dr. Ilana Gurevich, a naturopathic physician and acupuncturist who is board certified in naturopathic gastroenterology. I specialize in inflammatory bowel disease, IBS, and other functional digestive disorders. Let's jump into today's episode.
The following discussion is for educational purposes only and not intended to diagnose or treat any diseases or conditions. Please consult your doctor before incorporating any of this information into your care. The information presented on this podcast is not medical advice.
Okay, Turd Nerds, we are back. Today we are having a discussion led by our own Dr. Ilana Gurevich, and we are going to be covering treatments for traveler's diarrhea, acute gastroenteritis, foodborne illness, all of that disaster that you don't want on your trips.
So I'm going to say this is a topic that very commonly crosses all of our emails and phone calls and appointment visits. This is happening. How do I make it better? So after years and years of experience and years of looking at the research, there are some tools that I just always pull on that seem to help. We had talked about some of these tools earlier on our traveler's diarrhea prevention protocols, but they're kind of the same ones that I use to treat. The first one that I always pull on is Saccharomyces boulardii. Saccharomyces boulardii is my favorite probiotic. There is so much data about it, really showing that it seems to decrease length of time of foodborne illnesses pretty considerably, and considerably could be something as short as 24 hours. But when you're having a foodborne illness, 24 hours less of your diarrhea.
Yeah, worth it.
Worth it.
Yeah, it also just helps general diarrhea, too, regardless
It also
of
helps general diarrhea. It also,
Totally.
interestingly, helps constipation.
Yeah.
So the dosing that I've seen in the studies are basically looking at 250 milligrams or 5 billion 3 times a day. I do dose that aggressively.
5 billion CFU.
5 billion CFUs. CFU is an interesting connotation for Saccharomyces because colony-forming units is actually how bacteria form.
Right.
Yeasts don't.
Yeah.
So that's why the 250 milligram dose is a little bit more appropriate.
Yep.
But you can find it on labels of bottles at 5 billion or 250 milligrams.
And you said how many times a day?
3 times a day.
Yeah, with food.
With food. I have a patient who came in to see me, and they are a physician, and they were having some acute gastroenteritis, and they went to see me, and then they followed up with their primary, and the physician was like, "Oh yeah, I'm taking Culturelle." And when I hear Culturelle, it's like 10 billion CFUs of like one lactobacillus species.
Yeah.
I've never seen it do anything of any use, and you
Yeah.
can get it everywhere. And I'm like, why is Saccharomyces not this place? Taking this position. And so I was like, okay, take Saccharomyces boulardii instead. And then they followed up with their primary, and the primary was like, no, take Saccharomyces boulardii. This is not a alternative medicine thing. The data on S. boulardii for
That's
foodborne
really encouraging.
Traveler's diarrhea.
Yeah, great.
Yeah. So I always start with Sac boulardii.
Yep.
But honestly, I will use a lot of different probiotics. Generally speaking, probiotics seem to restabilize the microbiome and really help with viral or bacterial gastroenteritis.
So just have them keep multi-strain lactobacillus bifidobacterium probiotic as well, although tricky to find one that doesn't need to be refrigerated, but just take something because it probably has still some potency.
And, expensive. Saccharomyces boulardii is generally pretty cheap.
Yep.
But I think the more biodiversity you put into the GI, the better.
Yeah.
So probiotics, no-brainer.
Do you give, if people are acutely sick, they eat what they're going to eat. But do you ever recommend prebiotics with it?
You know what I recommend if people are acutely sick with gastroenteritis? Congee.
Oh, yeah.
It's good, that would have been good in China.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Where was that when you were sick?
Yeah, why didn't they give me any of that stuff?
So, I often tell the story of, I always had really perfect poops after my Crohn's disease, obviously.
Yeah.
I had perfect poops until 2 things happened. One, somebody got elected as president, and that was hard for me.
It's an apolitical podcast.
And 2, I got norovirus. And I got norovirus basically in the same week. And forever I was like, oh no, it's because, our government changed, and really I think it was because I got norovirus. But I was living with all of us we had to cancel Christmas that year.
How did you know it was norovirus? Someone got, you just know?
Well, first of all, there's no other bowel movements that are quite as expressive.
With everyone's.
And everybody got sick. And you know what ended up happening is that we had a family.
All the 10 people that live with you?
Well, so they were not living with us. We had a family come in, and a bunch of them got norovirus beforehand, and they were fine.
Oh, no.
And then one of them got norovirus, like one little bout of it, when she arrived, and within 24 hours, everybody was
like a cruise
down.
ship.
We literally canceled Christmas.
No.
And somebody was like, "Oh, I read somewhere that like on the internet we should make congee," and we made congee in the Instant Pot.
Yeah.
Congee takes a long time to make, or 20 minutes in the Instant Pot.
Yeah.
I could feel my bowels forming for the first time in a day eating that congee.
Which is weird because it's just watered down rice.
But I think that rice is really
sticky,
binding.
glutinous.
Yeah.
Did you use a particular type of rice?
Jasmine.
Yeah.
It was like congee is my go-to
Right.
if anybody gets diarrhea.
Right.
Which, back to my question, isn't much of a prebiotic.
No.
White rice isn't.
Well,
really.
but if it's like cooked and then cooled and then heated up
very
again.
good
So that's
myself.
like the resistant starches.
Totally.
I think so.
Yeah, it's not nothing.
I didn't cool it down.
Right.
I just
but,
ate it.
I mean, you might have the next day and not remember.
And it just feel like that's still one of my ironic. I think because it made me feel so much better.
Yeah.
It's still one of my favorite
Very
meals.
soothing.
yeah.
Prebiotics, I worry about a little bit, but I don't know if it's a theoretical or a real
Yeah.
concern because I'm like, there's something growing in there. It might
Right.
be viral. It might be
Totally.
bacterial.
Very good point.
Do I want to feed it?
Yep.
And I think that prebiotics are actually generally pretty specific for helping beneficial flora, but I just don't think about
I
using
hadn't
it.
thought about that. That's kind of scary.
Well, I think
who
that
knows?
the reason why we have such pathogenic flora is because
Yeah.
we don't eat prebiotics.
Exactly.
So we're not pushing the good guys,
Yep.
and prebiotics push the good guys.
Yeah.
But
I just know things like psyllium husk can really firm stool up, when needed, but so can some of the other things we'll talk about today.
okay, so then let's talk about my other knee jerk. Probiotics are my first knee jerk.
Yep.
Charcoal.
Yep.
Activated
Exactly.
charcoal,
Which will stop you up
which will stop you up.
and turn your poop black.
I think of it often as, magnets for
Yeah.
all of the pathogens.
Totally.
You can take a lot of it. Your stools will turn black.
Yep.
Charcoal is what they give dogs when they get exposed to like grapes or chocolate or something that can kill them because it binds everything up
Yeah, it's got
and traps
extreme
it.
surface area, so it absorbs everything, including your medication, so don't take it with your medications or your Sac Boulardii.
Right. And so, but charcoal is the other thing that I think the two things you should always have in your cabinet are Sac Boulardii and charcoal.
For sure. So when you give it, you're recommending capsules
I
for people
am.
to take while they travel. I've had some people who wanted a powder instead, and
I didn't even know you can get a powder.
You can get a powder.
Kinda hard to mix.
And you drink it. It just
Yeah.
sounds disgusting.
I would just stick with capsules.
And I like the capsules because I have a little bit more confidence they might be getting further in there, but I wanted to ask you guys because I didn't know.
Yeah.
I did not. I feels like also like your teeth and the grit.
I know. I mean, it's real trendy to like brush your teeth with charcoal right now, so maybe it's 2 for 1, but maybe not. While you
I'm
have
looking
food
for a different
poisoning.
toothpaste. Maybe I'll try charcoal. Okay, so those are my two.
So charcoal you only take when you're acutely sick, and you started, and how often are you taking it?
2 pills up to 6 times that day.
Okay.
I'm taking it high.
Yep.
It's like a bummer to be sick.
It really is. Yeah.
So those are my two go-tos no matter what.
Yep.
And then we start playing with the antimicrobials because obviously there's a microbe in there.
Yep.
And that I'm going to say is a little bit less clear cut. Because like we can try some, but they don't always work.
Yeah.
So, I'll often, there's a product that's on the market that's like a highly available garlic tincture. I prefer the tincture form. That is very, very effective in my experience. And whenever anybody in my household gets sick with anything, we kind of start with a garlic. And so, I'll usually give 5 drops a couple times a day.
Yep.
That is super effective. That's one thing that I start with. Another thing that I'll use just some of the really high berberine containing species because they
Yeah.
have really broad spectrum efficacy.
Yeah.
And so, that's Mahonia or Oregon grape or echinacea or coptis or any of those types of herbs. I find those to be effective.
Yep. Any other herbs?
That's I mean, the only other one that I have people take Coptis and or neem usually if we're going to do antimicrobials or a berberine mix.
Yeah, I've heard other folks' protocols for this, like other doctors, and they're giving like the combo products that have like some wormwood and, you know, maybe some antiparasitics.
Assuming it's a parasitic issue.
Yeah, just 'cause you don't know sometimes when you're sick. I don't see them work quite as well. I feel like you need to dose a single herb or a single constituent really, really high in these cases to really get efficacy, or maybe even like a little bit of the same herb every day for a little bit. Do you guys have thoughts on that?
I feel like I agree. You're not pussyfooting around your dose.
Yeah.
And the trick is a lot of these herbs are really cold. Like from a Chinese medicine perspective, we're trying to figure out what kind of infection is it.
Yeah.
So a hot infection would be like bloody, painful, crampy, spasmy. Like that's a hot infection. And a cold infection would just be like, you know, like just a whole lot of poop falling.
One more time? Okay, I got it.
Also, guys, we don't have a sound machine. That's just, that's natural.
We're doing our own sound effects here for the Turd Nerds.
And so, you know, in my experience from a Chinese medicine perspective, when you're looking at a diarrhea condition, you're like, if this is cold, then you're going to want to think about warming things up like ginger or like turmeric or like pepper, like something that's going to warm up the GI. And if it's like really hot and crampy and bloody, then you're thinking about cooling it down. And that's where the berberine comes in. And that's where, you know, indigo naturalis, peppermint. And so you're looking at that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, assuming you have herbs at your disposal while you're traveling.
So then that brings us back to, you know, we did an episode on my travel protocol, serum bovine immunoglobulins, SBIs, also known as colostrum. SBIs are also on my top 10 of treatments. The reason for that is because
top 10. You're sending these people with a lot of.
Well,
I'm just kidding. They might be back. They might be back seeing you in the office at this point.
And you know, the real question is, what do they have in their cabinet?
Right.
Because I don't think anybody who's having any diarrhea is going to come and see me.
Right.
And so then you're sending people. So then if they have SBIs at home because of a different protocol that we've used, SBIs are also lots of data to show how it helps with acute viral infections.
Do you change the dose on that?
I go up.
Okay.
I'll probably go 2 grams 3 times a day.
Got it.
Yeah, I
go way up. For the duration of the illness.
For the duration of the illness and probably a couple extra days after.
I mean, that makes sense because there's no way to tell from their history usually if it's bacterial, viral, or parasitic.
Right.
I mean, we just know it's acute and
we're not going to wait for the lab to come back.
Yeah, and the lab might not. Highly unlikely it's actually going to identify it a lot of the time.
Right.
So.
Yeah. And so then SBIs are a really good, you know, thing to throw at it. I would probably put SBIs before I put herbs, actually, because I just find like it's harder for me to figure out exactly what herbs.
Right. And if it's a viral issue, I mean, you can get a viral gastroenteritis while you're traveling. We don't like need to eradicate it, you know?
Yeah.
It's going to go away, but then there's the after effects. Whereas, and most bacterial pathogens also don't need, I mean, our body usually resolves those, but we need these supportive things. There's a few bacterial pathogens that, of course, if the symptoms aren't going away, we'll just treat. But a lot of them, even in conventional medicine, the protocols are like, this usually goes away on its own, you know? So.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask you both about Pepto-Bismol.
Oh, I love Pepto.
Right, because the bismuth, as we talked about in our biofilms episode, awesome, so many properties. Yeah. Do you ever use that?
I think I use it equivalent to sort of charcoal if I'm going to have them take something, and it can help with the dyspepsia and sort of cramping, and also just warning them again, stools are going to turn black, so don't think you have melena. But similar to I've used it similar to charcoal.
So when I was going to China, we talked about last time I got really sick in China. That was in the height of my Crohn's disease episodes, and my gastroenterologist was like, "Can you just take Pepto every day?" That was her prevention protocol for traveler's diarrhea was, you know, about, I think it was 2 grams of Pepto daily to prevent, you're going to get black stools. That's kind of normal. I didn't, but it's interesting that for their prevention, Pepto can do that. It's a really good.
Bismuth is great.
Bismuth is great.
My concern with Pepto, like short term, go for it. It works really well. But the sub-salicylate that Pepto-Bismol uses versus the subnitrate that sometimes will compound for folks, that's not great long term.
No. I think there's no bismuth that we want to give someone long term.
And the bismuth,
too. So
yeah, I agree. So yes, Pepto is definitely, if that's what they have at home, I think Pepto is going to do, because the bismuth also has some antimicrobial properties. Yeah. So I think Pepto is going to do better than like loperamide, you know what I mean, or Imodium. Like that's not really doing anything except stopping you from having diarrhea.
Right. Although, you know, if you do have a plane coming up, Imodium is the way to go.
Yeah.
And dehydration. I think dehydration.
For sure.
So that's the other really interesting thing is dehydration, electrolytes. Like we have to remember all of the other, it's not just about turning off the GI, it's about the supportive tools that we have.
Electrolytes,
So patient story. I had a patient who was, she was a pretty sensitive GI patient. She had a bunch going on and she was like obsessed. She made all her own food. She was like, very limited diet. She did all her own cooking. And almost every time she would eat out, she would have a huge episode of like vomiting and diarrhea. And she was like, I can't believe I got another foodborne illness. I can't believe it.
Even in the U.S., you mean?
Even in the U.S., in Portland, where we have good food, that's organic, and she was eating in those restaurants.
Yeah.
And we kept on like working it. Turned out that she had terrible MCAS.
Yeah,
she was getting a histamine reaction every time
she was getting a histamine. And so I was going and doing my usual things to treat for foodborne illness.
Yep.
And when we figured out that the problem was actually histamine reactions, that changed everything.
Yeah.
Yep. So the other thing to remember is sometimes it's a foodborne illness, but not always.
Yeah, look for the patterns. Yep.
Okay, so then other tools that we have to kind of help assist people are fasting and like chilling out there, like giving their GI a break. Broth.
Bananas,
the brat diet.
Seems to work pretty well. I also, maybe we talked about this in a different episode, but in pediatrics, applesauce with carob powder in it can really slow diarrhea down.
I feel like I remember when you shared me that data.
Yeah.
Carob is interesting for slowing the diarrhea down.
Yeah, not cocoa, but carob.
Tastes
worse. It's okay. It's not too bad. But you can mash it with banana too, or applesauce. Probably works just fine in adults as well.
And, the other thing is, sometimes foodborne illness is diarrhea or vomiting. Sometimes it's just terrible food stagnation.
Yeah.
And that is the thing. Like when I get sick, when something happens and I'm out, I don't get diarrhea anymore. I get food stagnation.
Yeah.
And so I feel distended. I feel bloated. And I'm exhausted. My energy is like down to a 0. And generally I have good energy.
Yeah.
So the most important thing for that situation is if you don't feel like eating, don't eat.
Right.
Like listen to your body.
Yep. You're saying food stagnation with traveler's illness or just
any
in general?
kind of gastroenteritis.
Okay. People who are having issues eating out and such, or just in general are having recurrent sort of symptoms that might mimic this, but could be food stagnation, especially if it's like, it only happens when I eat out or when I different types of foods in different countries.
Yep.
Yeah, that's definitely how my body responds to, and I found papaya enzymes to work really well for that.
So what I will often do is I'll make a really, really strong decoction of ginger. So I've
when are you guys getting this food stagnation? Eating out here?
It's often when like I've eaten something that doesn't I just know
just
there was
a random
off about
something.
It.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe not to the point of food poisoning, but like that I probably shouldn't have eaten
lower
that.
quality food or something to that effect.
And for me, it also happens with like highly processed foods.
Okay.
Just because I don't generally eat those.
Right.
And so I'll feel that.
And we're not meant to eat them.
And they're kind of gross, right? And so all of a sudden my GI will just shut down.
Okay.
And it feels like I have like a tub of rocks sitting in my stomach.
Yeah.
So then the really, really strong decoction of ginger. So to decoct, you usually decoct roots and you infuse leaves, right? So ginger's a root, so I'll take it and I'll chop it up. Little hint on ginger. If you store ginger in your freezer,
we did that.
So you can store it in your freezer and then use a microplaner when you need it for recipes. You always have it. The skin is edible.
Yeah.
So I'll take some of my frozen ginger and I'll chop it up, not that small, and then I'll put it in a pot and I'll cover the pot and I'll bring it up to a rolling boil and boil my ginger for easily 25-30 minutes.
Yeah, that's very soothing.
Yeah, and it's strong, but it's like it can help things move. Like we know that ginger improves the migraine motor complex.
It's like a hot sort of, like you were saying with the Chinese medicine, it's like cold stagnation.
Yes.
Yeah, it's also really good for nausea.
Really good for nausea.
I tell my patients to cool it usually, like drink it kind of chilled, because it just tends to feel better on a nauseous
We're not
stomach.
supposed to drink cold liquids, Rebecca.
Well,
room temperature.
You're throwing up. I don't know.
It's a different situation,
the
maybe.
The choice is Sprite or cold ginger.
And then, there is an incredibly abundant amount of data for food stagnation in particular on STW5, which is also known as Iberogast. STW5, if you look at the data, it is astounding with how improved motility, but also it can improve any kind of abnormalities within your GI.
Yeah.
In Germany, it is the Pepto-Bismol of the German world.
Yeah.
I had this great patient who was an engineer, and he worked for a company that had locations in the U.S. but was based out of Germany. And so he'd go back and forth to Germany quite often. And we were treating him for bacterial overgrowth. And, I was just getting into the data on STW5, and I was just blown away. And I was telling him about it, and he was like, I was literally just in Germany, and I went to the doctor because I was having this GI symptoms, and they gave me STW5.
Cool. Yeah.
That's great.
It is really licoricey, though. For
Yes.
people who don't like licorice, or there are contraindications to it, but it does really work.
Yeah.
You have to dose it kind of high, but...
Unfortunately, at the
it's
moment,
hard to get here.
Well, so it's an interesting story. So STW5, the company that makes it, was bought by Bayer Pharmaceuticals
A while ago.
a while ago. And when Bayer bought it, they immediately pulled it from the U.S. market. And so you can still get it, but it's getting imported through Germany.
Yeah.
And I don't know if they're making a drug on it, or they just didn't want to get rid of the
Taking their
competition.
time. Yeah.
Yeah, because it's been a while.
Yeah.
But so the only place you can get it is on Amazon.
Yeah, and there are local herbalists who make a version of it too.
But it's a proprietary blend, so we're not really
know.
ever quite sure what
Yeah.
they're making.
And we know these herbs.
Yeah.
They're good digestive herbs.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it does work very well, and you can just order it off the internet. That's worth quite
Yeah.
a bit.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask about bringing antibiotics, like preventative antibiotics. Well, not preventative in the moment, but bringing them as prevention.
I do it.
Yeah.
I'm very selective.
My question is with what patient are you doing this with versus the charcoal thing?
Great question. Do they have it? Do they have an antibiotic that I want to give them at home?
Can we get it?
Can we get it?
Yeah.
So, I think the antibiotic that we're both
Yeah.
talking about is, I think we're thinking about rifaximin.
Yep.
Rifaximin is approved for traveler's diarrhea.
3-day course.
3-day course.
Yep.
Very, very effective for a lot of people. Some people, if they're huge GI, if they have a big GI history, probably 3 days is not going to do it. But I think of rifaximin as a eubiotic.
Yeah.
So it kills the bad guys, but upregulates the good guys.
Yep.
There are patients that I just have always stocked with it.
Yeah.
Like that mast cell patient, we were using it every time she'd get sick,
Right.
but it wouldn't get her out of it. And in hindsight, it's because I was treating the wrong thing.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So I think, if there's access to it, because it's not
Yeah.
cheap.
Yep.
But also I consider it for folks that they're the recurrent SIBO type, which, isn't a ton in my population because we do deeper digging and figure out why this is going on for folks. But, folks with hypermobility conditions, dependent on antibiotics for various things, reasons that it's going to be severe. And I want those people having antibiotics.
Yep.
I've also seen people give nitazoxanide.
Oh, Alinea.
Yeah,
Brand
for
Alinea.
travel.
That's my other.
Yeah.
I think I have a list of 5 or 6 naturopathic drugs.
Yeah.
You just hit a third of my list.
It's a good one. And it does have, some antiparasitic qualities to it.
No,
So
it definitely has antiparasitic,
maybe a
but it
little
also has
broader.
antibiotic qualities to it.
Yeah, and I think there's data. I've heard there's data coming out on it for post-infectious IBS, SIBO kind of stuff. Treatment.
They did do a SIBO study many years ago,
Okay.
2018, that showed efficacy. Not a
Yeah.
huge, I think it was a phase 2, not a huge study,
Yeah.
but very effective.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think it's underrated.
Yeah, I do too.
I used to use it. I still use it with some patients, but I also have seen it potentially cause problems for some patients. So I think unless we identify that they have a parasitic organism or it's a story that's highly suspicious of Giardia or something, I don't know that I would jump to it. But it's not a bad thing to have around.
What did you see? Will you give us a patient
It
story?
can cause I heard years ago that if someone it can cause imbalance of yeast actually and other microbes because I used to think it really was just mostly antiprotozoal, but it is an antibiotic as well. So I've been more cautious with its use and using it for shorter periods of time than I used to use it with people.
Yeah.
That's great to remember.
Yeah.
It is.
Because I do put that in my, when you look up
I know.
inoxanide,
It has no side effects.
no side
it says.
effects.
Yeah.
So
literally
it
no side
literally
effects.
it says long-term serious side effects,
Yeah.
none known
Yes.
but may appear.
Yeah.
And then side effects: urinary discoloration, nausea, diarrhea, headaches.
Yep.
Yeah, and I do see those.
I see those all the time,
I
every
see
time.
them a lot. Yeah, and it's more available because we can compound
Yeah.
it.
And you can just, if you're in a lot of third world countries, you can just buy it yourself.
Totally.
So
Yeah.
if there's a story for it, I could see a case for it.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, I agree. That is one that's on my list for.
Yeah.
Rifaximin harder to get.
Yeah.
I find that generally it's easy to get if you want a 3-day course. Almost all insurances will approve a 3-day course.
Yep.
So for this
rifaximin.
purpose, it may be
Right.
Okay.
For acute gastroenteritis.
It's harder to get, and you need prior
for the
auths.
2 week.
Yep.
for longer courses.
Right. Yeah.
So that's the problem with having it, but I do think it works. And it's like, if I was going to have them add anything, I'd probably have them bring Xifaxan on a travel.
That makes more sense to me.
Yeah.
It's way easier
Nitazoxanide,
than all the other supplements. It's a lot less to pack.
Yeah.
You know. It's doing what needed to do. Nitazoxanide, I assume, has higher absorption, systemic absorption than rifaximin as well.
Well, it doesn't work on the same bug. So, I mean, if you're thinking it's parasitic, I think it makes more sense to use nitazoxanide. But if you think it's a bacterial organism, then it makes much more sense to use.
Yeah, rifaximin.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Those are other things that I think about are really just like very patient specific.
Yeah.
But I do, like, I am now triggered if it's happening every time they're eating out. I'm triggered to assume it's not.
It's histamine.
It's not viral.
Yeah.
Like there's something else going on. You're treating the wrong thing.
It's a good point. I have a handful of patients too that seem to react every time they go out, but they're fine at home, and we haven't quite figured out what, and it might be more histamine than actually a food issue.
I also think a lot of people who have gut issues carry around a lot of anxiety.
That's
with
true.
Out.
Right.
Yeah.
And they
It
might
just wears their nervous system when they're eating out.
Yeah.
That's fair.
That is fair.
Or
that is
any
fair.
of us who've been traumatized by food poisoning while eating out or traveling, that,
And it is like terrible.
Yeah.
Like having that diarrhea
The
is
worst.
you
just want to die.
You just want to die.
It's awful. And if you're throwing up too, just horrendous.
I remember I was so sick. The kids were really, really little. And of course, Justin was working the whole day. And I was so sick. And I was like, I need to feed these children. And so I went to New Seasons, and it was like a hot day. And I was like parking. And then somebody walks in, and I could smell them. And I had to like throw up in the garbage can.
This was in 2016?
This was in, it has to be 2016. Yeah. Yeah. That's because Debbie was a year.
Yeah.
It sounds kind of like first trimester.
Oh my God, it was awful. It just, and I can still, like, talking about it right now with you guys, I can still
Isn't
feel that
crazy?
visceral feeling. I would do anything to prevent it, and if I get it, I want to treat it fast. So these are the tools that I use to treat it fast.
Yep. Yeah, and I think it's really important to do that because post-infectious IBS, post-infectious SIBO
right, so we can prevent that.
We want to prevent.
Right.
Yep.
Can I also just make one more plug for a supplement that I'm just starting to play around with that I think has a big impact for this kind of stuff?
Yep.
Is liposomal glutathione. I just recently, one of my friends is a supplement manufacturer, and he was telling me about using the liposomal glutathione for some of his viral stuff. And so every time we guys started getting sick, we used it. And my mother-in-law got a crazy GI bug.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, let me try to throw it in. And I think it sped things up. Like she'd feel good for like an hour or two after taking liposomal glutathione.
So just pushing liver detox, or what's the
I
mechanism?
think so.
Yeah.
I don't know what the mechanism is. I think it upregulates detoxification, so it gets it out of your system.
Yeah.
But I think that that one's like a new one. I'm still playing around with it.
Yeah. I feel like it's either going to really help or really make things worse.
But it's expensive.
for people.
It is pricey.
Yeah, it is expensive.
And so
I personally think it tastes like farts.
I can see that.
They try to like put some lemon or like peppermint.
Yeah,
in
that
there,
one
but
always to me has been in like an overused category.
Really? Because I feel like I think I used to put it there and roll my eyes about it.
Yeah.
And now that I started using it, I was like, oh, I think I've been underusing it.
Let me know in 3 years.
Okay, that sounds fair. That sounds very fair. Who wants to recap?
That was a lot.
That was a lot. Okay, well, let me try here. So, if you get sick while you're traveling, we're thinking of some probiotics. We're thinking of the immunoglobulins. Charcoal for sure. Start that and dose
And or
it high.
Pepto-Bismol.
And or Pepto-Bismol.
Saccharomyces boulardii for the probiotic.
Yep. And
And
then
then herbs.
Congee.
herbs.
Kanji.
Electrolytes.
Congee. Bananas.
Herbals if you have them. Maybe
if
throw
you
in a
have
little
'em.
antibiotic.
Maybe
Maybe
some
throw in a little anti-parasitic.
Ginger
depending what you
decoction.
have.
Yeah. And then we've got the drugs.
Yep.
If you happen to have them, they're going to be quick and easy and probably really help.
I'm just going to put the disclaimer that sometimes they're quick and easy, and sometimes it's a want, and sometimes the herbs and other stuff is quick and easy, and sometimes it's a want.
Yeah.
Throw some spaghetti against the wall. That's what medicine is.
Yeah. Whatever it takes to stop that diarrhea.
Yep.
Yeah. All right. Thanks for tuning in.
Bye, guys. Thanks for joining us today. Stay tuned. We release episodes every 2 weeks.
If you like this episode, please subscribe and don't forget to rate and review us to help spread the Turd Nerd word.